And y'all thought I was done making videos. Howdy, howdy. It's History with Stevens.
Steven.
History with Stevens.
Steven.
On April 30th, 1789, George Washington was sworn in as the first president of the United States. And the United States was starting under the Constitution. The Articles of Confederation were officially a thing of the past. But Washington's presidency wasn't just kumbaya and good feelings. In fact, serious debates started over a wide range of issues, including the president's titles. The Federalists, supporters of a strong national government, wanted the president to have a noble title like European leaders had at the time. Anti-Federalists, already skeptical about how much the federal government's power expanded through this, thought this sounded a little too much like monarchy, and they feared this would lead to the president having more power than the president should have. He knew he needed help as the president, so he created executive departments. These departments would help Washington govern the nation. Congress eventually approved 3 departments: the Department of War, the Treasury Department, and the State Department. The Department of War was headed by Henry Knox. Henry Knox had fought in the Revolutionary War, and his job was to advise the president on any military conflicts that may come up in his presidency. In all honesty, this was probably the one part of being president that George Washington didn't need a lot of help with. He's been almost his entire life in the military and was a general during the American Revolution. But he also understood that future presidents may not have that same military background and would need a trusted advisor in that field. This department still exists today, but it's now called the Department of Defense. The Treasury Department was headed by Alexander Hamilton, a well-known Federalist. The Treasury Department would oversee the nation's finances. The last department was the State Department, and it was headed by Thomas Jefferson. The State Department would handle relations with other countries. You know, all the diplomatic stuff besides war. One of the biggest challenges the new government faced was the lack of funds. Hamilton, who was also in charge of the nation's finances, advocated for a whiskey tax. Congress agreed to tax the production of whiskey. However, a lot of Western farmers in the Appalachian Mountains didn't like this at all. They made a lot of their money by producing whiskey. Protests began. A lot of farmers refused to pay the tax. Congress attempted to end the protest by lowering the whiskey tax, but some farmers, especially in Western Pennsylvania, refused to pay taxes at all. Hamilton and Washington viewed these actions as a threat to federal authority. If you remember from episode 8, Shays' Rebellion was the beginning of the end of the Articles of Government, and Washington didn't want to see the new government suffer the same fate. Washington sent 13,000 troops to crush the rebellion. Thomas Jefferson and many of the former anti-Federalists criticized Washington for this decision. Jefferson thought Federalists, people like Hamilton, who wanted more power for the federal government, would be willing to use an army to put down opposition to their government. At the same time, the French people started to rebel against their king. At first, most Americans supported the French people as they fought to depose their king. However, Hamilton and Federalists would later change their mind when they heard about angry mobs starting to behead wealthy nobles. Many Federalists, who were wealthy themselves, started to worry that something similar could happen in America. Thomas Jefferson and his followers, called Democratic Republicans, or Republicans, saw the French Revolution as a crusade for common people and for democracy. After serving 2 terms, Washington decided to step down. He wanted to set the precedent that the president would not serve for life, and that there would be some rotation in office. However, before he was done serving, he addressed the nation in what became known as Washington's farewell address. In Washington's farewell address, he warned about the divisions between 2 political parties, the Federalists and the Republicans. Washington warned about the threat of the, quote, spirit of the party. Washington warned not to be loyal to your party over your country. He feared that fighting between the parties would tear the nation apart. So we've mentioned the Federalist and Republican parties, but we haven't gone in depth about the issues and their disagreements. So let's go ahead and do that. The Federalist Party, led by Alexander Hamilton, supported a strong national government in order to unite the states and keep order amongst the people. The Federalist Party thought that national power and national unity was more important than states' rights. The Federalists also wanted the wealthy and the most educated to be involved in the government. The Federalists also wanted to use the federal government's power to promote business, manufacturing, and trade. One way in which the Federalists planned to promote manufacturing was by implementing tariffs. Tariffs are taxes on imported goods coming from another country. The idea behind it is will make the cost of goods from other countries go up, and goods from America will be cheaper in comparison, and then people will buy those goods from America. If Hamilton's dream of an American economy based on trade and business could become a reality, the nation had to start paying off its debt from the American Revolution. In order to pay off the debt quicker, Hamilton wanted the federal government to assume and take the state debt over so they could pay it off quicker. Of course, the states that didn't have much debt, mainly in the South, didn't want to help pay off the debt that the northern states had incurred during the war. In order to get the southern states to go along with this plan, Hamilton offered them a permanent capital in the South. The plan passed and Washington, D.C. became the nation's capital. The Federalists also wanted Congress to establish a national bank. This bank would make loans to businesses so they could get started. Businesses often have high startup costs, which makes it difficult for people with good business ideas to get started. Southern states once again led the opposition to this plan. They argue that the banks didn't help the agricultural part of the American economy. The Republican Party, also known as the Democratic Republican Party, led by Thomas Jefferson, believed that the best government is the one that governs the least. They wanted a small government with limited powers. They believed that the state should be given the majority of the power instead of the federal government. Washington also wanted common people, farmers, to be running the government. The Republicans believed that the future of the American economy would be based on agriculture. In Jefferson's mind, an ideal nation would include a nation of self-sustaining farmers who all own their own land. Because the National Bank didn't loan money to farmers, Jefferson and the Republicans opposed the creation of a national bank. The 1796 presidential election was the third election in U.S. history, but the first truly contested one. The first two elections were easily won by George Washington. He didn't run for president, he simply stood for it. In the election of 1796, however, Federalist John Adams ran and defeated Republican Thomas Jefferson. It was mainly a north-south split, with Adams winning most of the northern states and Jefferson winning most of the southern states. Thomas Jefferson came in second and became the vice president. The government quickly realized it wasn't a good idea to have the person who came in second become vice president. So they changed the process to allow electors to have 2 votes instead of 1. Wouldn't this just result in a tie between the president and the vice president? I don't know. I'm sure they'll figure it out, right? Right? They'll figure it out. So John Adams was elected president. The Federalist-led Congress passed a series of laws known as the Alien and Sedition Acts. 3 of the laws were aimed at non-citizens. It lengthened the time it took for non-citizens to become citizens from 5 to 14 years. Since most immigrants voted Republican, Jefferson looked at this as a partisan attack against his party. The Sedition Act made sedition, encouraging rebellion against the government, a crime. In practice, this law was used to punish Republican newspaper editors who insulted John Adams. In total, 10 people were convicted under this law. Because the Republican Party viewed the Sedition Act as a violation of the First Amendment, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison drew up a resolution opposing the Sedition Act. The resolution stated that the Sedition Act violated the Constitution, so Virginia and Kentucky should nullify or refuse to recognize the law. This was the biggest challenge to federal power since the Constitution was ratified. So the election of 1800 comes around, and John Adams is running for re-election against Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson chooses Aaron Burr to run as his vice president. John Adams chooses Charles Pinckney. So the campaigns start based on the issues. Jefferson supports states' rights. He wants to limit the power of the federal government. He promises to run on frugal and simple government. Adams runs on his record. Adams argues that the country is doing well economically and that he was able to avoid war with France. However, the campaign quickly turned to name-calling. Yes, it started in 1800. We have a long history of name-calling in politics. Republicans attacked Adams as a tyrant and accused him of trying to turn the nation into a monarchy so his children could follow him. And while Adams was grooming his son, John Quincy Adams, who would later become president, this was a bit of a stretch. Federalists responded by saying Thomas Jefferson was an atheist who sought to destroy religion and introduce immorality. This belief stems from the fact that Thomas Jefferson actually created his own Bible. He took out passages of the Bible that he didn't approve of and even added some of his own. And while that didn't make him an atheist, the Federalists didn't let that get in the way of an effective smear. Concerned Puritans overwhelmingly voted for John Adams in 1800. However, despite the insults, many Federalists wouldn't support Adams because of his foreign policy. This led to a big Republican victory in the election of 1800. So when the Electoral College voted in 1800, they overwhelmingly voted for the Republican candidates, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. But remember, there was a couple rule changes after the election of 1796. Thomas Jefferson came in second and became the vice president. The government quickly realized it wasn't a good idea to have the person who came in second become vice president. So they changed the process to allow electors to have 2 votes instead of 1. Wouldn't this just result in a tie between the president and the vice president? I don't know. I'm sure they'll figure it out, right? Right? They'll figure it out. Oh no, they didn't figure it out. Anyways, Thomas Jefferson, Aaron Burr tied with 73 electoral votes. This won the election to the House of Representatives. This meant that a group of Federalists in the House could potentially swing the election to whichever one of the Republican candidates they wanted to. So after 35 ballots, 6 days of deadlock voting, Hamilton convinces his fellow Federalists to throw their support behind Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson becomes the president. They end up changing the rules shortly after, so the president and vice president would then be chosen on separate ballots. This scenario won't happen again. Burr gets furious that Hamilton cost him the presidency. In 1804, Burr would later shoot and kill Hamilton in New Jersey. But the most consequential moment of the election of 1800 is the fact that there is a transfer of power from one party to another without any violence. This is something we probably take for granted in America, but if you look at the history from around the world, we really shouldn't. This is something that is crucial for a democracy. Everyone can flourish in a democracy when there is no transfer of power. It's when that first transfer of power happens from one party to the next that democracy is really tested. In this case, America succeeded. And that's all for this episode of History of Stevens. In our next episode, you will see a rap battle between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Stay tuned, and remember to be kind, be responsible, and be safe. Wait, that's not the catchphrase? I thought that was the catchphrase. That's the catchphrase for Meadowview News. Oh, you know, it's been so long since I've made one of these videos, I guess I've just been making Meadowview News videos. And so we should do that again? Okay, we can do it again. Why not? And that's all for this episode of History with Stevens. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, leave a comment in the comments. Peace!